Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to Good Measure. My name is David and I'll be your host today. Today we have Sara Wood, Director of the Global Management Office at Pfizer. She's here with us to talk about Pfizer, her work during the pandemic, and the tools that she deployed in order to sustain Pfizer's Program Management Office goals. Sara, thank you for being here with us today. Do you mind quickly introducing yourself to those in the audience who may not be familiar with you and your work?
Sure. Hi, David. So thank you for inviting me to the interview. Before I get started, I have to say that any views expressed here are my own and not those of Pfizer. To tell you a little bit about my role, I lead the project management office within the legal discovery group of Pfizer's litigation division. So any project management office, basically their function is to define and maintain best practices for whatever that function performs. So for me, that means overseeing the activities associated with legal discovery. So pretty much that's anything from identification of potentially relevant data all the way through to production of responsive documents as part of the legal discovery process before a trial. So what that means, generally speaking, is that we work a lot with our stakeholders, internal and external, to define, what our workflows are, how we can be really efficient, how we can do things very consistently so that we have a very high quality outcome on a regular basis, right? So we define a lot of metrics, we measure a lot of our discovery activity, and we kind of just have to adapt to the changing environment around us quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, so first of all, thank you for being here. And so quickly, nowadays, there's so much debates, and as a director, I think you can speak a bit about this. There's so much debates on the topic of just job recruitment and the qualifications needed to get an entry-level job. And as someone who has had experience in this, what are some of the most common things in an application or during the training process that you've seen in PMOs that make them good leaders, and isn't necessarily usually college GPA? What makes someone stand out?
It's a great question, and it's not always an easy one to answer. Obviously the things that they've done that stand out on their resume attract your attention initially, but I find that during the interview process, especially for what I do, so project management in general, there's a cross-section of sort of innate qualifications and innate qualities, I should say, and skills, learned skills that make you a good project manager. So it's almost like you want people who really appreciate the why and the how. Like they naturally are curious about these particular questions. And I say the why because you want people who are naturally curious, who want to figure out what caused a problem. How do we get here? How do we prevent it from happening again? And the how question, because this is a role that really requires being in the weeds. You have to be very detail oriented. You have to like to plan and track things. And if you aren't interested in the how, it's a very unsatisfying job for you. So if you think of someone who's a really strategic thinker, they're really good at seeing the big picture, but they don't focus in on the weeds, it would be a terrible role for them because they would be very frustrated because they don't want to get down into the weeds. Whereas me, I'm better at the weeds. So if I'm tasked with something highly strategic, I can do it, but I'm always wanting to know how we get there, from day one to finished.
Yeah. And so I guess similarly, like, what are some of the most important qualities that you've seen? And is it possible to train someone to have these qualities?
So on the innate qualities, it's very challenging because it's not something someone's really naturally inclined to do. On the other qualities, so the other two things that are key in what I do, it's sort of a good intersection of technology, project management, and the legal having a legal background, in the sense that you have to understand e-discovery, which is just electronic discovery, and the rules of civil procedure to an extent, and how that process works, which you can learn. You can teach someone how that all works. But you also have to have a certain technical aptitude. So a lot of what we do is dealing with different types of data sources and databases and platforms that are used to host documents for review. And so you have to be very comfortable with all different forms of technology. And especially as this function has morphed into more adopting more AI type things, that's even more important. And then the project management one, as I mentioned before, that's the thing that you really can't teach people. Either they really like it or they don't. So that's kind of the breakdown of the three things I see.
And so as someone who's really involved in the process and who mainly just works on projects, right? How do you gauge success, and is it even important to gauge success, and how do success and failures play into a project manager's real learning process?
So I work a lot with the project managers who oversee our matters. I'm not actually managing the matters. I'm looking at it more at the portfolio level. So we're trying to see, we're tracking any metrics related to discovery activity, which is somewhat volume based and also turnaround time based. So how much data do we collect in a given month? How much data do we process? How many documents did we review? Are there any outliers? Did we have a really busy month in January, and why? Because I like to be able to take the big picture metrics and help people drill down to see what was actually going on. So if we see that there was a lot of activity in January, for example, we can easily see, okay, where was that activity? Was it in data collection? Was it in review? And if we drill down and see it was in document review, we can drill down even further to see what it was. Maybe there was an unusual type of data we had to review that required more time. So that's important. And then also just measuring our trend year to year. Are we seeing more activity this year than last year? How are we being forced to adapt because of new enterprise tools? So anytime the organization, the digital group within our organization rolls out a new enterprise-wide tool. So think of Microsoft Teams, which is very popular now that we're all working virtually, but was coming out even before that. We had to figure out a way to collect Teams data and process and review it, which was a whole process that took quite a long time for us because it's a whole new type of data in the sense of how it's structured, how you collect it, how you send it somewhere downstream, and how you normalize it for attorneys to review. So,
And so speaking about Google Teams and the pandemic, so after the pandemic and going through all this sort of online working period, what have been some of the key learning things, and have there been some changes made to the work, the way that you work as a project manager that have sort of stayed because you found out that they're way more efficient?
Well, so first of all, I have to say that I've been working from home for 15 years or so. So for me in the beginning, it didn't seem that different. But culturally, the legal division as a whole, I think we were very used to working at a facility on site. So the majority of the people were going into our headquarters office, or we have offices all over the world, of course. But for them, I think there was a big concern about how we would continue to function and fulfill our obligations, right? And I think what people found after the first year, after 2020 especially, they were really surprised at how quickly people adapted. We do have to have more, Zoom calls, we're doing a lot more virtual meetings. We use our cameras a lot more. I think it really has instilled in some ways a really positive aspect where people just are more human about touching base with people just to see how you're doing. I feel like there's a lot more camaraderie, which is an odd thing to say since we're not together, but it just, I think we just naturally use the same tools that we had. We just rely on those things that support virtual communication even more.
Yeah. And so I guess similarly, like, how do you, as someone who does a lot of management projects and works basically in the management area, like, how do you make sure that you're efficient, and how do you sort of stay on top of your workflow, especially using like specifically, like, what tools do you use to sort of keep on top of things?
Sure. So we use a lot of collaborative tools. We do use Microsoft Teams. So if we have a particular project that we're working on together that has to do with Office 365 or some new technology like that, we'll create a new team of all the people who are collaborating on that particular issue. We'll store all our files there so that we can all share them and work on them together. But then, there are just a lot of normal things that you would use to track all the things that you're working on. Different knowledge management tools where we just can share lists and project plans and see the status of what we're working on and how we're working on it together. Because I work in process improvement. There's a lot of workflow diagram software that I use. Visio is always tried and true sort of standard for process mapping.
Yeah.
But nothing that's really too unusual.
Mm-hmm. And so as a project manager, do you sometimes actually have to learn new topics in order to sort of keep up with your divisions so you understand what they're doing? And if so, like how do you learn, and how do you learn sort of in a manner that will allow you to sort of keep up and be at the pace that they're at in a short amount of time?
Well, I think a couple of things. Working for a big company, there are a lot of opportunities to learn a lot of things. So there are lots of different functions that you can reach out to, or if you're curious about learning more about what they do. And that's sort of big picture answer to your question. So it was interesting for me coming on board. I've only been at Pfizer for 6 years, I believe. And I'd never been in-house at a big pharmaceutical company, and just learning about how the whole process works to bring a drug to market was really interesting for me. But more in the day-to-day of what I actually do. You don't really have to look too hard, because anytime there's a new technology, we have to learn how to deal with it. We have to learn how we're going to collect it and how we're going to review it and how it's structured. And if we have to evaluate new technologies to do those things, and new processes. So it's really some of my colleagues and I joke about how it's job security, because as long as technology is evolving, we have to find new ways to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess, lastly, so how much sleep do you get, and how do you, outside of work, maintain a healthy work-life balance while working online?
I love this sleep question. I would say on average, I probably get about 8 hours of sleep. I'm always trying to get more. I wish I could get more sleep. I used to be a really early morning person. I like the quiet time to get organized before the day kind of starts. But I don't have a good answer to what the right amount of sleep is. It seems like everybody's a little different. I feel like I could use a little bit more, but I struggle with staying asleep because my mind is thinking about all these things. In terms of maintaining a good work-life balance, I think it's just important to set your own priorities, especially now that we're all working from home. There's a tendency to work even more because there's no separation between work and personal life. So you really have to be good about, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go out to lunch today. I'm going to, turn the computer off at 6 o'clock or whatever the case may be when you can. Those are the types of things that I think are really important. And I would say that another positive from the pandemic in a way is that people are more understanding of those things. Like, people understand that you don't need to be tied to your desk maybe from 9 to 5, as long as you're getting all of your work done. Maybe you work best at 8 at night. And so I think being flexible, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is really important, and making time for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your insights. Is there anything else, any last words that you would like to say to the audience?
No, I don't think so. Just thanks for having me, and I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right, David.